Hello there, welcome back to Marcelian Online, and I know what you are thinking. You are tired of all of these goddamn tier lists with the meta for all of those people that play plus 18s and 19s and 20s and the MDIs. What about me, man? What about the keys that I play? My plus 10s that I just do for the weekly vault? Today, we got you, buddy, because we will be talking about what specs are like in plus 10s and how are they ranked and why are they all S tier. They're not all S tier, but we will elucidate this mystery, let's say, by starting off, of course, with Frost Death Knight. Now, of course, in an ideal world, I would probably put all of these specs into S tier because they are legit way better than they need to be for a plus 10, especially if you play them properly and you have some decent gear. They're gonna be just fine, but that would be boring, of course, right? So I will put Frost Death Knight around in A tier. Frost Death Knight, after the buffs that it got a couple of weeks ago, is doing insane amounts of damage in both Deathbringer and in Rider of the Apocalypse, giving you flexibility of choice in having some more fun with your talents. And of course, playing Rider of the Apocalypse would be a first for Frost Death Knight, since last season it just went full on Deathbringer. It does crazy amounts of damage, it has really good utility, it is a Death Knight, you'll survive when all of your friends and pugs will die. So you're gonna bring in the cheese, the cake. Not unlike the cheese and the cake that you will get with the player profile that Marcelian Online has provided for you, the 2.5 version, with the link to get down in the description below. With this player profile, you will be doing your 10s so much better and so much easier because it has so many tools to make the run smoother for you. And a couple of the new ones are right now when you lose aggro, if you're particularly a tank, or if you're just a random DPS and sometimes your Shaman pops the Earth Elemental, all of the plate bars will now turn into this light blue color. Scion, is that a League of Legends champion? I don't know, but it is very different. You can see it. And actually, what's the most important thing that I think I like about the player profile that Marcelian worked so hard to make is the phase indicators on the plate bar. You see that little tiny white line that indicates when the boss will start doing something else, like the last boss in Priory, when it just jumps at the top and you have to chase her past the stairs. And you can do this for mobs as well. You see them like the light spawns also in Priory when they start to, channel their AoE explosion that heals their friends, so you know when to move up. And all of this comes free, of course, in the Marcelian Online Player 2.5 with the link down in the description, fully supported by our patrons that we love to make it available for everybody for free. Use it and enjoy your plus 10s as much as you might enjoy it with an Unholy Death Knight. Now, this is a little bit trickier to put because obviously Unholy is an S tier spec, but you're not going to see its full power in a plus 10, so I will still put it around in A tier, maybe even B tier, but that's probably doing it a little too much disservice because if you do play Rider of the Apocalypse, you won't have these issues. The thing with Unholy and why it is meta in all of those big keys and all of those big boys is the Blood Beast spawn that can actually scale its AoE damage past the normal levels, because outside of that, if you play Rider, you still have some of the best, most AoE damage in the entire game. Now, since that's random and it can proc at, when the pack dies or just in between packs, that is terrible and you lose a lot of damage, which is something that doesn't happen as often in high keys because you just stay way more longer in combat. Mobs take longer to die, more chances for the Blood Beast to spawn while you are inside combat. And since it only scales with really, really big pools, you might not see those in plus 10s if you're playing with your average pug, and the same goes for a lot of the S tier specs that might not be S tier in plus 10 in our humble opinion. Havoc Demon Hunter is around A tier as well. Normally I would have ranked this a little bit higher because it is simpler to play, it requires less stress, and it has some flexibility with Felskard and Aldrachi, but it still retains some strong points that you cannot really take full advantage of in a plus 10, like the Aldrachi Reaver funnel damage with Wounded Quarry that you can just sink into a one target and just destroy that. You kind of have to know what you're doing, and that target has to live long enough, and that doesn't really happen in 10s, provided everybody's kind of like equally geared at this point into the season. Balanced Druid is, I will put it into B tier because it has a problem that it has been having since Shadowlands, I believe, where its AoE is probably the best in the game, or at least at the very, very, very top. However, you need long pulls that just stay alive for a very long time, and you need big pulls as well, because balance tends to spend about 10 seconds at the very least preparing for the damage. And in a plus 10, when you just have a Ret Paladin that just goes in second one, by the time those 10 seconds lapse, everything will be dead, and then you're pressing your incarnation, nothing else is happening. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean Balance Druid is a bad spec, it's just you're not going to see the full strength of it in a plus 10, and the lower in keys you go, the worse off it performs, but at the plus side, the higher in keys you go, the better the spec will be. Feral Druid, however, will be a little bit better. I'm still not going to put it into S tier. I think it does way better than Balance because it doesn't need that ramp. It still needs big pools, similar to Unholy. It's one of the specs with very, very, very high damage ceiling, and it scales in AoE higher because it doesn't have uncapped AoE on the Primal Wrath bleed application. That's where the damage is coming from, and the more targets you fight, the more Apex Predator procs you get, and that just comes in full circle once you're doing, I don't know, 15 mob packs pulls, and that's probably not going to happen in plus 10s. Devastation, again, also in A tier. Boy, this is becoming very predictable. Devastation doesn't have that much ramp, but also wants big pulls, and you'll probably see this trend all throughout the A tier list. It's probably more accessible in terms of damage. I'm debating if I should put it into S tier. Because it does do, I think I'm putting it into S tier anyway. Let's make this the first S tier spec because it doesn't have the infinite AoE necessity that Unholy has. It still does better and bigger AoE, of course, kind of like Feral, but it doesn't have to build up to that, and its procs don't really, it's not like Apex Predator procs, okay? It's still pretty good. Beast Mastery Hunter, holy shit, I think it's one of the best specs in the game, and not necessarily because of how it's doing its damage. Beast Mastery is fairly consistent with its damage, but its ease of play is incredible, and that's what's propelling it to be S tier. I think with the advent of Marksmanship Hunter, Beast Mastery has been kind of forgotten in the background, but it's not like it got nerfed or anything, and before Marksmanship came up, it was close to an S tier spec, period, at the top of the meta. At least it was an A tier spec. It was doing cranky, insane damage, and that hasn't really changed. You will see the loss in big AoE pools, which is not going to happen in your plus 10s, hence why it is in S tier. Marksmanship, I kind of want to put it there as well, but for the same argument, I'm going to leave it into A tier because Marksmanship is just really, really into its procs from the tier set. And it's kind of like the Blood Beast procs. They probably happen way more often than the Blood Beast, but they can also happen at weird times, and you might not be able to take full advantage of them because things just die really quick. And I'm talking about the Explosive Shot procs, of course, the Lock and Load procs. So all of that makes Marksmanship really, really good. I mean, it's A tier, but it's not quite S tier yet. I actually don't know much about Survival. Not a lot of people play Survival. Survival is just doing really low. It's doing actually really good single target damage, so it might not be too bad. I think I'm gonna put it into B tier with the caveat that it could be an A tier. I just haven't seen a lot of Survivals, and I don't really see any reason to play Survival over any other Hunter spec, but it can be really good. Its single target is still pretty good. It's a melee spec, so it has access to faster kicks, but it is a melee spec in a range meta, so take those with a pinch of salt. Arcane, also a B tier spec. Arcane, or maybe even a C tier spec. Okay, it depends. So it's either C or B tier depending on how much damage your group has. Because if you go into a pack, even if it dies quick, if your Touch of the Magi has time to explode on the target, it's a B tier spec with that, because the rest of the pack is probably dead by then anyway. But if the target dies, you're actually not gonna do very well in terms of overall damage. You can do some really cool cleave execute damage with Arcane Barrage, doing more damage on 35% health targets or lower. That might be where it's at, but the time it takes for you to build up. So your Touch of the Magi lasts for how long? 10, 12 seconds, and you prep for it like 3 or 4 seconds in advance. So it's kind of like Balance Druid where you have to go for a little bit. And usually in those situations, you also pop a Bloodlust. By then, if you have a Ret Paladin, that Ret Paladin kind of annihilated the entire pack. If you're playing with very undergeared pugs with Arcane, you can actually carry that party, and it can even be all the way into A tier. But I know how much it suffers, so I'm going to keep it into C tier. Fire Mage, similar to Balance, will be down in B tier. It requires targets to live quite long enough. It requires quite big pulls. This is not anything new. Fire has always been like this, and that's probably not going to change. Similar with Frost Mage as well. Not much to say about mages in terms of their performance and plus sense. They're good specs, don't get me wrong. It's good to have a mage to have a time warp. They're very tanky. If you're a decently geared mage, you're probably never gonna die in a plus 10 ever, and that's really good. You might have to change your builds a little bit to factor in the fact that mobs just die really quick and you're probably not gonna have those big pulls, but once again, it kind of depends. If you don't have a big blaster burster in your party like a Ret Paladin, you might even see Fire and Frost be even higher, like all the way into A tier. I'm keeping them here just to create proper expectations. Don't get me wrong, they're good specs once again. Windwalker, personal bias here, easy S tier for all the reason the other specs are not S tier. It excels in burst AoE. It has access to the burst very quickly. It's target capped, so you won't have to have big packs. And if you're playing in pugs with a chill, very safe and secure route, you're probably not going to pull more than 2 packs at a time, and Windwalker is just an expert at that. You are incredibly tanky, one of the tankiest DPS right now, particularly because of the physical damage reduction that you have through your passive, which is where some of the wild damage happens in a plus 10, like a weird trap in priority of the Sacred Flame, or weird ass frontal, or the tank losing aggro. Having that 90% physical damage reduction is insane, and we also have a video on it that you can check. Obviously, Ret Paladin is probably, like I said before, that Windwalker is maybe the best spec for plus 10s. I might also give that to Ret Paladin. It's debatable because Ret also likes really big pulls as opposed to Windwalker, right? So you might not be able to take full advantage of a Ret, but Ret doesn't care, man. If the buttons are there, you press them. Ret does almost the most amount of damage in a group. In big insane AoE, you'll never out DPS a balanced Druid or an Unholy DK. In super single target, you're not gonna out DPS a Windwalker, that's for sure, but you're gonna do like 90% of everybody else's performance all of the time across the board. Shadow Priest, I don't know if it's in B or C tier. It's kind of like the other specs as well. It requires very big pulls, very specific type of pulling to keep up your dots and keep using Shadow Crash. If the targets die, the thing is, if the targets die just as your Shadow Crash is coming off cooldown, then you might even be an S tier spec, because if you can just approach each pack with a fresh new Shadow Crash and your dots never really drop from your target, you're probably an S tier spec. It does really well. You do have good damage. You don't have the most amount of damage, but you're also bringing Power Infusion, you're bringing Fortitude, you're bringing a lot of Dispel, so it's a very good spec, especially for the affixes as well. Assassination. Ooh, I'm gonna put it a little bit into A tier because it still has some of the issues where you need your target to live long enough. It's kind of like a mix between Arcane and Unholy. Does a little bit less damage than both of those in their niche situations, but it doesn't require as much prep time and as much catering as the other ones outside of stealth. Bros, if you play with Assassination, for the love of God, just let the man re-stealth to have access to Indiscriminate Carnage so you can apply bleeds in AoE. Come on, we were past this already. Outlaw, holy shit, bro. I don't know what Outlaw's eating, but man is cracked, dude. Outlaw is the fucking destroying. Outlaw's back, basically, because Blade Flurry has been fixed with the bugs that it had and it now can actually do damage. Of course, Outlaw is a very complex spec to play as opposed to Beast Mastery, but the reliability of its damage output is so high that it has to be into S tier. Plus, it's a rogue and it's a very tanky spec. I'm not too sure about Subtlety. I kind of want to put it into S tier. Or maybe B tier. It's kind of like Shadow Priest. If you have proper access to stealth and your cooldowns, you're just going to annihilate everything. You have more damage than a lot of the specs in this tier list once you have your cooldowns up and ready. Once you have your Shadow Dance and your Secret Technique, of course, because you have Symbols of Death every time, no matter what, you're gonna destroy. The thing is, with Shadow Blades, I keep messing these cooldowns up with your big cooldown, that things might just die too quick for Subtlety to actually start to pop off, right? It's a spec that does a lot in cooldowns, but not much outside, and the outside part of the cooldowns are probably less of an issue in a plus 10 than it is in a higher key, which is why I think Subtlety is a little bit better in lower keys than in high keys. Elemental, as much as I love this class, bro, I'm not sure it works really well in small keys. Its AoE damage is probably the best in the game. I said that about balance, I believe, but I think Elemental might actually take the cake. It doesn't require the RAM that balance does, but it does require the targets that balance does. So it's around the B tier. It's an incredibly high damage DPS spec. I just don't think you can see that in a plus 10. However, enhancement might be slightly different. I'll put it at the top of the A tier, maybe even S tier, because it doesn't require necessarily the ramp that Elemental does, and doesn't really need those big of a pulls as Elemental does, but it is a very squishy spec. And if your healer in a plus 10 isn't really aware of that, even if you're decently geared, you might still die to certain things, because you really only have one defensive cooldown. I'm sorry, but Stone Bulwark Totem is not a defensive. I know the devs want it to be, but bro, come on, there are trinkets that do that better and on a lower cooldown. Don't just give Shamans a better defensive, okay? Affliction, for the same reasons that Shadow is not very highly ranked, Affliction is even low ranked because it has an even shittier time dotting everything up. I don't think Affliction can catch a break, bro. Until they fix Vitality, which is probably the biggest problem that Affliction will have in low keys, because you're just not going to be able to have consistent dot uptime. That's going to suck. Your dots will expire way before Vitality comes off cooldown, as opposed to Shadow Priest, which gets Shadow Crash exactly when those dots expire, because what? That's the only argument that I have for Affliction right now. Outside of that, it does have potential to do quite a high amount of damage, by the way. So it's not like it doesn't do damage. It's just not designed for the pacing. And the pacing will dictate your overall throughput, the encounter design, the number of pulls that you're going to have, or the number of mobs that you're going to have in a pack. Those actually dictate the performance of a spec, and not as much as how balanced it is. Demonology is not going to have that problem. I'm going to put it all the way into A tier. Maybe I would put it into S tier, to be honest, but I still feel like it has to build a little bit of imps to get into those big high damage situations, especially if you want to do big implosions. If you're not going from pack to pack to pack to pack, Demonology might suffer because you might have some of those imps die or lose some of those procs, but it might as well just be S tier. I'm just not 100% sure. Destro, I kind of want to put it into C tier, but I feel like maybe I won't do it that much justice. It doesn't need that much ramp, but the damage does actually ramp. I mean, you don't need setup. You just fire your Rain of Fire. That's about it, right? But the damage starts to stack and scale up the longer the fight goes on. So it cannot really be that high, but it's not quite Affliction level either. It has some decent single targets, and the Kit of Destruction is just very low maintenance, right? You just fire it up. You just need a lot of targets, and that's about it. And that's why I'm probably not going to put it any higher. I think Arms is probably A tier. It's a I don't know where to put it. It's fine. It's a good spec. It does decent damage and a decent burst. Demolish is really good. Cleave with collateral damage is very good. You might not be able to get those fat cleaves with that big juicy collateral damage in a plus 10 if the targets die too quick or if you're not pulling high enough. You don't need too big pulls, by the way, because Arms is also kind of like target capped. I think Cleave only hits like 5 targets and does reduce damage to the rest. And I'm not sure if it applies deep wounds to everything, but you're still not going to hit everybody at your fullest, and you're just a sweeping strike spec. So even with that, you just do insane amount of damage, period. I still think Fury is just way better because it's, well, of course, just like Windwalker, it's target capped, but you just have access. It's kind of like Ret, right? You just have access to your damage right away. You don't really need anything else to do. You just go, 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 go. It's decently tanky. It's where you're probably going to see Fury actually perform. Augmentation, even though it's actually good now in pushing high keys, we're seeing plus 19s clear with Augmentation, which is like really weird, but whatever. You're not once again, you're not gonna see its true value in a plus 10, even if you can make it work. And I think it still requires a certain amount of comp to make it work, because not all specs benefit from your Ebon Might as much, and you want specs that really benefit from your Ebon Might, or you're still kind of underperforming even Devastation at this point. So this is kind of how it looks at the moment. I tried to make it as least boring as possible, because in reality, we can move all of the A tier specs into S tier and all of the B and C tier specs into A tier and just have like 2 tiers. Guys, WoW is fine and all of the specs do incredible amounts of damage, and that's pretty much all you need in plus 10s, with the odd CC or Dispel to get rid of the affixes, and that's about it. And it works really well, and it works better with our Marcelian&Flame player profile 2.5 that was just released just this week. It's new, it's fresh, it has a lot of things. Once again, click the link in the description to get it right now, right quick, and start pumping in your plus 10s. If you're not sure how that works or what that is, you can check this video that Marcelian made to explain to you what the plater is, how it works, how to install it, how to change it for you if you want something specific. Click it!